Hello, I'm Alex Selenitsch. This is my language factory, and I'm about to take a walk through it. Much of the work in this exhibition, more than half, derives from this particular cross-section through a house that I was introduced to in 1976. The house is called Innisfail. It's in Batesford in Victoria, and it has three bits to it. It has a front veranda, it has a middle bit which is substantial out of blue stone, and it has a lean-to out the back. And I thought this three-part system was a very attractive architectural idea, but very soon into working on some alterations and additions to the project, I realised that it was actually a kind of a metaphoric diagram which could explain lots of three-part relationships that are in life, but not necessarily in architecture. This meant that I could start thinking about architecture as a cultural pursuit, not just as a business or as a way of making buildings. So let me take you through from this start to the work that really continued from this particular project. So follow me. Okay. Now, the Innisfail section, as I thought about it in those days, was a three-part system. However, the cover photograph for when it was published had a huge photograph of the chimney that was on the side of the building. And my colleague, Greg Missingham, pointed it out to me and said, "You always talk about this as a three-part system. What about this fourth bit called the chimney?" So of course, I thought, well, I have to do something about the chimney. So I did some chimneys. So here are some Innisfail chimneys from the project. And then the chimney took over, because it too has a kind of three-part system to it as well. Chimney is a place of an irreversible action. There's a bit of heat generated, there's some ash, and some smoke disappears. And this too is a metaphoric system, also three-part. So I started to make some other chimney bits out of some materials that I would discover. And here you can see with these three chimneys here that the materiality of the thing itself is starting to influence and inflect on what the shape and the image of the chimney is doing. This business of working with a material and finding something in that as a structuring device for the metaphor and for the understanding of the image then continues through just about all the rest of the work we will look at in a moment. So these are the chimneys. I thought, let's not make just some chimneys. What about doing a building with maybe 7 completely different kinds of chimneys crowded into it? So it was kind of like a field of chimneys with the kind of residential spaces or some kind of occupiable spaces in between them. Well, that project has taken a long, long time to do and has finally morphed into, actually a couple of decades ago, it morphed into what I call the language factory, which you can see here in a number of different drawings. There are some things that look like architectural models down here, which is essentially a factory with a whole lot of chimneys in it. What I did there was to try and find a way of describing the whole business of language from the point of view of its production, not from what it means or what its technical aspects were in the sense of books or writing or whatever, or the grammar and all that sort of stuff, but what it's like as a social event, what happens when you produce the stuff that is that kind of language. And in the end, I thought I would take 5 different kinds of language productions, put them in rows. You can see on this drawing here, there are 5 of them here, okay. Put a corridor across the bottom as well to link them all. There's an entrance to this building here. And then there are chimneys scattered around in the project, in there. It's basically 2 per language group, 2 per language production group, which mark those particular cases where there is an irreversible change occurs in the production of that particular language. Now the 5 languages are really writing, printing, speaking, singing and signing. And by signing I mean like road signs and logos and all that kind of stuff. So here they are here. I've added, as the project went on, I added a kind of a building down here to contain ideas. This drawing doesn't show it, but there's a whole paddock over here with various objects that's shown on this drawing over here. of machines that perceive things for us. In a way, this drawing was the reason I undertook this project in the first place, I realised. Now, what I wanted to do was a large drawing, which was a map, a kind of a spatial diagram of what language could possibly be, and to make it so that it was readable as a map, as a drawing, and as a plan, all at the same time. Okay. The chimney itself, it went to becoming a standard kind of wedge-shaped thing with modifications to it to get a suite of chimneys which are drawn over here. So you can see there are 7 chimneys. The one in the middle is a neutral wedge shape, and then over in this set they've had extra things added to them, and here they've had bits taken away. So those 7 chimneys are the ones that are used in the final project. There are not 7 chimneys, I think there might be 12 or 15, I've lost count. And there's actually a real chimney in there too, as well. So these are the drawing of the complete set. Then I did some coloured versions of what this might be like. For instance, if this building was all white, the chimneys would be coloured. How would they be coloured? Well, I thought, okay, typically, I didn't just pick up a colour for them, I picked a system of how you might colour them. The colour system is to do with a colour wheel, and a selection of 3 of the colours for each of the particular things. So this is the signing chimney. It has the red, orange, yellow, and it moves its way around to the violets and the reds again down here. So there are 5 separate kind of colour schemes. You can see in this case that, and with this one here, that there is a kind of tendency for me to find a systematic or a coherent kind of series basis to what is it that I make. This business of working with groups is something that I have done for a long time now, but it's become more and more obsessive. And this, I think, shows it in action in a kind of intuitive way. On one of my visits to the workshop, I found a whole lot of MDF bits and pieces that were cut out in beautiful circular shapes, things like vases, things like footballs, ovals, things like cups. Of course, I gathered them all and took them to my office, spread them out on the table, and fiddled around with them for a while to see if I could make some kind of construction. And in the end, what I did was I got some paper out and I did some drawings using them as profiles, as stencils. I think I did about 10 of these, 10, 11, and then put them away. And then a few years later I thought, oh, maybe I ought to colour them. And of course the question arises then, what kind of colours would you use? Which colours would you use? What kind? Well, because I had a whole lot of chalk, I thought I'd do some chalk ones, and I had a whole lot of oil pastels. I would do some oil pastel ones as well, but that still didn't solve the problem of what colours to use. It then occurred to me that this business of using things that you have found and that were very beautiful and were not touched by you in the first place had a resonance with some of the paintings that I've been looking at from the school of purist paintings, generally by Le Corbusier and his cousin Ozenfant. And they made a great play of using anonymous objects as the objects that they did the still lives with. And this continued with Corb through the rest of his career. So I thought, I know, the colours actually of the 1920s work started to look very like the colour palette that I had with all the oil pastels. So I thought, okay, that's it. I will take a painting by Corb or Ozenfant and reduce a colour scheme from one of those and use that as the colour scheme for the particular drawing. So each one of these drawings in fact has a reference to a particular painting from the 1920s. It's a pity we can't have the originals here as well, really, but there we are. Okay. Now around here is basically the same idea but done in a different format. So these are again bits of timber that I found from the workshop, and I've stuck them together to form things that look more or less like still lives. This one, of course, it looks mostly like a still life because there's a back to it and a floor to it. So it looks like a table and a little upstand at the back. Some of them begin to look a little bit like large ocean liners or kind of funny vehicles. But anyway, the idea in these cases was always to be responsive to the size and the shape of the object that I'd picked up. They were not to be altered in any particular way, in any kind of way. And then they were to be assembled with some sense of the colour differences between them. Although in some cases, in this one, for instance, not in that one, no, this one here, I have added some colour because they were too monochrome over it. So again, with some colours that were donated by students who'd left them behind at semester break. Okay, this one here bears traces of some other kinds of things that I'd stuck on them and thought, no, that's getting too decorative, and I pulled them off, but you can just see some traces on that. Okay, so this is to do with being a bunch of found forms. This business of using found forms, there's a couple of little models here with some very beautiful chocolate colours and some dark green bits of wood are kind of combined here in these little compositions. These use some, again, found blocks to make some chimney models, but essentially what this is some of the research into what this wedge shape might be like if it was in different materialities. So here, people who have taken my design courses in the past will probably recognise mass, plane and line being used here, but this is essentially balsa wood sheets and balsa wood blocks as they come. Here are some sticks that I found also that I could put together to find other ways of making this wedge shape. Okay, so that's basically where the chimney business ends, and I suppose it really ends with this block of stuff here, where in fact what it is, it's the set fire that's ready to go. This is the bit that actually would produce the heat and the ash and the smoke, and it's not the container for it. Okay, now to something completely different. Well, not all that completely different, because it still comes from my hand and from my way of thinking. I went to visit Norfolk Island. When we had a stimulus package years and years ago, Norfolk Island put out a special deal, $1,000 for 10 days on Norfolk Island. Well, I'd always wanted to visit anyway because of its position in Australian history, but also the fact that it was a very, very tiny place that about 3 or 4 times in its history, 3 times actually in its history, it has become the world centre of interest. All right, when I was there, I found a beautiful little sort of ruined little cottage, which was two sandstone blocks with a hip roof over the top. Now, I was a student in the 1960s and 70s, and I was brainwashed into hating hip roofs. Since about 1990, I've been trying to reverse this brainwashing by working creatively with the hip roof as a kind of architectural feature, and also noting how close it is to my suburban experience of growing up in an entire ocean of hip roofs. So here was this hip roof on 2 bits, and I looked at it and I thought, it's 2 qualities which are being held together by this slightly complicated, but in the end, a very simple hip roof, or a simple complex, which the hip roof might be. And I thought, well, what would happen if you were to design something where there were 2 completely different things put next to each other, and then they were both covered by a hip roof, and further, that the hip roof was generating the 2 differences and not just be a flat sheet that covers these 2 things that happen to be standing next to each other. So this is the drawing. So I did some sketches of this on the plane home from Norfolk Island to Australia. Got back into Melbourne, looked at them again, and I thought these really should need to be drawn up properly, and I put them in the drawer, and that was it for a number of years. Until the first lockdown, when I was still teaching here on Zoom. And I had some time left over between the Zoom things. All of my stuff was trapped in here anyway, so I had these at home. And I thought, we'll draw them. So I got some bits of paper, and I drew these out specifically, and these drawings show, as you can see, 2 things coming together. Here's a diagram here. This little plan here is of the 2 blocks. Obviously there are 2 rooms in each of those. That's the drawing of the hip roof over it. And this has been derived from the hip roof, the two things. So for instance, this one here is a cross, which centres on that ridge point there. And this is this curved cross here, which centres on this, and they are put together, and that becomes the thing underneath, and there's the axonometric of it. These are meant to be, this is meant to be quite small, so that's 1 metre, or they could be larger. Or we could just have a little tiny one here too. The size of this is really nothing to do with it. What it is that business of bringing two things together. When I was drawing these, I thought I should put in some floor colour. And when I was doing this one, I thought, ooh, this floor colour looks maybe even more interesting than the architectural drawing itself. So I did another set. There are 5, by the way, here, A, E, I, O, U, which are the 5 vowels in the alphabet, which again pushes it into somewhat tentatively into the notion of language, of literary language. So these are the floor plans, which are just the floor plate colours. Of course, they've been modified for these drawings because they've got to work on their own. This is the only one that is sort of the same as the other one. And is it upside down or is it the right way up? I don't really care. So these were done, and they sort of finished this particular project of two things coming together. I showed these drawings here in a Zoom meeting with, I showed them to colleague whose name escapes me completely. I can see her face there. I'll remember it when I go over to the furniture plan. I showed it to her and she said, how do you expect, very diplomatically she said, how do you expect these things to be occupied? And I thought, oh, furniture plan, of course, that's what I need to do, but not of these, okay? So I thought next thing I should do would be to make some furniture plans, and they are distributed on this wall over here. So the first set I did, of course the question became, how would you do it? What is in a furniture plan? Well, I thought, well, the interesting thing about furniture, when you look at the way we use it, first of all, it's got to be used in a space. We can't operate in an architectural space without some kind of furniture. It's the medium, it's the agency or the catalyst we have to be able to occupy a space and to make it meaningful. The other thing is, what building would you, well, first of all, no, next thing was, how do we do this with furniture? Are there various kinds of groupings? And I thought in the end, well, yes, we put furniture around the walls. We put it in stacks. We also just distribute it like sort of a crowd of people wandering through the space as loose items. There's probably another way too, and I can't remember that as well, seeing I'm on the fly here. So the next question became, which buildings should I draw furniture plans of? Well, I quickly dropped the idea of doing any famous 20th century buildings, but 19th century was the century before that. So I picked some 19th century ones, and one much earlier than that. So this is 4 furniture plans which describe what happens if you put things against a wall. If you make them as corridors, that was the 4th one. We use furniture to make kind of corridors through space. This is corridors. This one is in stacks and piles. And that one is just loosely aggregated, flown through the building. If you carefully look at these, you will find that sometimes the bits of furniture go through a wall. They don't actually occupy a space. Actually, this one actually behaves itself. But sometimes here, things go through a wall. They extend past the building, they're through it and so on. So there are hints here that this is not necessarily just a furniture plan, it's also a drawing. Plus it's also a drawing done with particular instruments. So the stencil has been made, the crayon that's been used to draw this is marked in here. Here's a compass, for instance. Here is a brush that's not been used on this, but I just thought it needed a long green line along the top up there, and so on. So these were the 4 different kinds of furniture arrangements that you could possibly have. And then I thought, well, maybe I should do one where the furniture arrangement is done for a particular event. And from the same source that I found this immigration building here, which is from the 1850s in Melbourne. This is also from that period in Melbourne. It's the first government house, which was in where the Supreme Court is now, since vanished to be across the river. So these are 4 separate events that occur presumably in Government House. And one is the proclamation of an edict. This one is the proclamation of honours. This one is a meeting of the Cabinet. And this is a visit of a delegation. So these are the kind of patterns and drawings. Now, again, this is just a run of stencils that run through this. I think this is some Lego that's been used over here. It looks like Lego, but it was done off Lego. Here is my pen that's been traced to be put on the drawing. And there are 4 different kinds of, if you like, compositional effects which come from the 4 different events. For some reason or other, I thought I needed to do another one, which was the same building but with connected events. You can imagine that edict, honours and proclamation might not happen one after the other in a particular sequence. But here is a drawing of the Thesion in Athens. So it's going back a bit further than the 18th century. The 19th century and then further back. It's a classical Greek building. It shows what would happen if you were to do a furniture plan of the state of arrival to it, where you pause and you occupy, then when you pack up and depart, and then when you remember it, you reminisce. So that's the three things. We've got arrive, pause, depart, and reminisce. And you can see the same drive here for producing a group of drawings with a kind of series or a systematic approach to them, to some kind of link together these individual items into a single thing. At that stage too, I thought, maybe I should have a look at, this drawing here, with the blurring on it, with the smudging on it, it's possible that some more work will come off this. Here I thought afterwards, well, reminiscing, what you're doing is you're trying to remember something, and remembering is always very hazy. Sometimes it's very sharp, sometimes it is a little bit on the fuzzy side if you haven't sort of thought about whatever it was that you're trying to remember for some time. And this business of blurring and fuzziness and haziness, which is almost a cliche as far as memory is concerned, suddenly I see a material analogue of this. And that is this business of chalk, which is itself temporary, very smudgy, very blurry, hard to control, needs to have constant attention, which is just like memory. So this might, in fact, generate a whole lot of chalk drawings, which are to do with this business of memory and the inability of things to stay firm and to stay precise. Now to finish, this is all work that has been done basically in this building, in the one in what's the name of the street out there? Swanson Street. When we were decamped over there, and in the building, the Brian Lewis building before that was here. So that's nearly all of this was done here, except these 2 were done in my new studio now that I've left the premises. And these are drawings of my new studio and where I work. So of course this drawing here has got to be called Working from Home, which everyone can understand nowadays. And then there's another drawing over here which is called The 4 Seasons. This is about what my studio is now, which is basically the way I use my house and where all my archiving is concentrated, and has a little tracing here of the mobile phone which I do not own or have or use. And this is some pencils and stuff that were used to draw the 4 bits here. It just so happens in our house there are 4 cubic rooms, very close to being cubes, and they are 4 separate primary colours. And I thought, some very close colleagues of mine and I share a liking in a past history for Strauss's 4 last songs. And I thought, okay, 4 songs. This is a kind of, instead of it being a retrospective, mournful loss or whatever, this is an indication of what I should be doing in the future. So maybe there's something to do with 4 different kinds of songs, or the quality of the number 4 coming through in future work. Of course, this is all, like all other plans, it's just a prediction. Seems like a good idea at the time, makes a pretty drawing, and I may not do that at all. So this is the, as I said, the language factory. And it turns out that having put this show together, I've realised that not just this is the language factory, and not just the factory that's been drawn and modelled over on there, but in fact everything that I do is linguistically based. All of the different books that I make, the prints, the bits of furniture, the buildings that I design, the poems that I write, these are all examinations of the language, or treat the whole area of those disciplines as a kind of linguistic phenomenon. So in fact, my language factory is my work. Just to remind you, and myself, I'm Alex Selenitsch, and I've been talking about the Language Factory, which is an exhibition at MSD.